I'm Morag and this is Tim, and we are really, really pleased to be here today to talk about a couple of things. One, primarily to talk about a particular study that we carried out for the Royal Commission that involved children, talking to them about safety, and talking about some of the tools we used. And I think you'll find that quite useful, and some of them you might think about how you might, integrate some of those tools into your practice. Background, the Institute of Child Protection Studies is actually a partnership that was established with the ACT government, the actual Child Protection Authority in the ACT government. It's been a very fruitful partnership, and over the last, this is our 12th year, I think we've been very successful in being able to work directly with practitioners and being able to feed our research directly into policy, and I think that's a really important aspect of research and a very important aspect of our work. So what we really are trying to do through our research is to enhance the safety and well-being of children and young people and their families. And we do this by doing, not just by doing research, but by the important activities around dissemination. So if you look at I'm going to put the website address there and it'll be on the end of the slides. It is a treasure trove of resources. It's a treasure trove, and I think you'll find that if you were looking for something particularly around children, I think you'll find that quite useful of the sort of research that we've been doing. Okay, so this presentation is about a research project that has multiple arms and legs that was commissioned by the Royal Commission, and all of you would be very aware of that Royal Commission. And it continues to have a lot of airplay, and I think it really has shocked quite a lot of people, the extent and nature of child sexual abuse in institutions, both historical and current. And their main aim really is to understand how and why sexual abuse occurred in institutions, and they are really very much given the job to be future focused. How can we learn from history? So it's about respecting the survivors and providing them with a real opportunity to tell their story in a meaningful way, but to be able to learn from that and to be able to have a very future focus. And as part of that, which I think is probably for not you as a group who are so children focused, it was really fantastic that the Royal Commission, in its very large and pretty well-funded research agenda, decided that what it was really important to do with all of the other things they do is to do a piece of research directly with children about how they conceptualise and experience safety and how they perceive safety. Why do they think the way they do? What do they think adults are doing? And to really try, and as you'll hear during the presentation, how we approach this pretty sensitive issue around child sexual abuse. You can imagine that there's a whole range of gatekeepers around the country, schools, parents, child protection authorities, who would be very worried about researchers talking to children about child sexual abuse. And so what you'll hear in this presentation is the approach we took to ensure that that was a safe experience for children and that the adults that surrounded those children felt very confident that we would be carrying out the research in a way that ensured those kids' safety. So we very interested in being able to feed back to the Royal Commission about what children thought institutions might do. So direct messages, and you'll hear some of those direct messages to the commissioners about what children think would make the institutions that they inhabit safer places. Okay, now this whole day really is about children's participation, and I'm sorry I missed the last presentation talking to small children. I think that's always a really revelationary experience to see what very small children can make sense of the world and make very important comments about their world. So we asked our children and young people we had 3 reference groups. We had a primary school aged reference group, we had a high school aged reference group, and we had a group of young people who were in an alternative education program. And the role of that reference group was to really help us frame, test out the tools, provide advice to us on a whole range of things. And we saw them a number of times, and they came to the launch of the report, and they were just an amazing group of children and young people who provided excellent advice. But we did ask them why they thought it was important that institutions engage directly with children and young people about their safety. And they said that it was really important that they be involved in identifying not only the issues, but also what the solutions might be in dealing with safety issues. So who did we speak to, and what did we ask them about? We were very keen to talk to, well, the Royal Commission was incredibly keen for us to talk to a wide range of children and young people, including children in early childhood. And our colleague, Dr. Deborah Harcourt, spoke to a range of 3, 4 and 5-year-olds in childcare centres about these issues. They were very focused on road safety. There's no doubt about it. They'd obviously had a road safety talk quite recently. And they were very, very interested in being able to share what they knew about what they needed to do and about what that meant to be, to be kept safe under those circumstances. But we also talked to kids in schools, different sorts of schools, kids who are in boarding schools, thinking about the range of institutions that the Royal Commission was interested in, but also a range of institutions that kids inhabit. We also talked to young carers who went on camps, and young people with disabilities who are involved in disability programs at school, a group of Aboriginal kids, and some kids in the young people in out-of-home care. Now, just as an aside to that, not surprisingly, and I don't think you would be surprised, those kids had quite a, much more focused discussion about safety. And that made us say to the Royal Commission, we think that that requires further exploration, and we're currently in the process of talking to children and young people in residential care about these issues. And I think, we're hoping those results will come out about September, about what children and young people need in residential care. No, I don't. I don't know why that's 14, Tim, because it was 18. Sorry, it's just a typo. No, they were 4 to 18, and certainly some of the kids in the out-of-home care group were older, were up to 18. And we were very interested in understanding what it meant to be safe and unsafe and how they could tell. Because I don't know whether you're surprised by this, but it surprises me, as someone who's been involved in research for a long time, that there are so many topics that we actually don't know what children think. And yet, so there's quite a lot of gaps. Now, there's quite a bit of children about safety in the community and safety in their schools and all of those things. There's quite a lot. But we hadn't actually got to those basics of what does it mean to be and feel to be safe? Where do you feel safe? How does it feel safe? Starting from where children are rather than coming in with an assumption about what safety might feel like to an adult. So we're very interested in that. And how safe are the places where children and young people are? How well are adults going, and what else needs to be done to improve that, having that nice future focus for the Royal Commission. So, as I said, we really needed to start by understanding what safety means for children and young people and what feel they need to feel safe. Because what you'll see is that, and I don't think you'll be surprised by this either, is that one of the rationales for talking with children is the assumption, the recognition that children see the world differently to adults, and that adults, when looking at children's lives, make a whole set of assumptions based on their position about what you can feel. And so it's really important to know what children need to be safe. Now, we do a lot of research about what you might say is a sensitive issue, and as I mentioned before, child sexual abuse is probably up there, along with DV. That's probably another one that really presses people's buttons. Are you talking to children about that? Aren't you going to re-traumatise them? And I would think that the sorts of processes that we put in place and the sort of practice you might engage with, that means that is something that's pretty unlikely, if done in a scaffolded and safe and respectful way, with follow-up if required. So recognise, and we put in quite a lot of structures in this project, as you can imagine, to ensure that adults mainly felt comfortable about us talking with children about these issues. So some of the safeguards that needed to be in place, some schools, for example, is that 10 minutes or 5 minutes? Thank you. Some of the safeguards that schools put in place, for example, were very much about maybe a trusted teacher being in the room. Now that's a very important thing for some schools to ensure that those kids are safe, but it may also impact on what children might be prepared to say. And I know that some of the people who did sit in on those focus groups were pretty surprised by what kids said. We didn't know they thought like that. We didn't know that they wanted to be involved in those conversations. They didn't know that, for example, kids wanted to know what the institution was doing to keep them safe. We also had to be very, very prepared for the sorts of disclosures that might occur. And obviously there are ethical and legal requirements that are required when doing research with children, as there is in a broad range of other practices. One of the principles that underpin our work is very much about giving children choices about how they participate, and that we really meant that it had to have processes in those focuses that were child-friendly, that kids had choices about how they might participate. If they didn't want to write, they could do something else. And they should be fun and engaging as much as possible. And also the importance of understanding the context of which the conversations were being carried out. So the idea, understanding that talking to kids in the out-of-home care context might be quite different to talking to young carers at a camp. That those contexts are really quite different. So we started off, one of the tools that started off in trying to understand that scaffolded approach, starting from a fairly basic beginning, was to do a bit of mind mapping around and as you can see, this is an example about that, and who makes you feel safe, where do you feel safe, when do you feel safe, and the kids, we've got a lot of mind maps. They're all very colourful and attractive. Some kids did pictures rather than a lot of words, and then we asked them the alternative thing, which was about how do I feel? What does it feel like to be unsafe? Where do I feel unsafe? Who's there? What and when happens? A classic sort of mind mapping thing, but it's a very interactive process. Okay, so what does it mean to be safe? This is what kids told us, that being and feeling safe are two different things. That sort of seems a little bit self-evident in its first thing, but it's actually really interesting that they might be safe, in the fact that they're in a safe situation, but they actually don't feel safe. And the kids were very concerned about the feelings of safety, and that the safety in their bodies or feeling of unsafety in their bodies, that sort of queasy feeling when they didn't feel well. It was also very much based on being able to make judgments about other people's behaviour. So kids talked about when they went to a new school, for example, or a new experience, they would be watching everybody else to work out whether those kids seemed confident and happy or whether they seemed worried and coward, and that would give them some judgment. They certainly could tell whether they were safe based on what they've seen or heard, their experience, and that's a complicated response because a lot of them then went on to say they see a lot of negative things in the media, and that, in fact, might also impact on their feelings, levels of safety, and what they've experienced. And what do they need? They need familiarity, predictability, and some sense of control, to be with others with those who they trust, and for adults to be adult-like and to demonstrate respect for children, to use their power for children and to do what they say they're going to do. There was a lot of stories about, kids talking to adults and adults either sloughing them off or overreacting. The mother who goes marching down to the school to talk to the teacher, and the kids going, that's actually not what I want. So, this is some of the discussion around it. So I'm going to hand over to Tim now because I'm a very good timekeeper, and Tim's going to talk about some of the other aspects of the study.
Thank you. So, just picking up briefly on one point that Morag made before around how kids experience safety, and they stress that feeling safe rather than being safe. They felt that adults spent too much time having a look to see what sorts of risks they could pick up, but didn't really spend much time thinking about whether or not the things that they had in place actually made kids feel safe. So they talked about the fact that sometimes there are security cameras around the place, on doors, there were things in place that adults had put there so that they would be okay, that they wouldn't be abducted, that they wouldn't come across creepy adults, that they wouldn't be in unsafe situations. But kids said, that changes the way that, that I feel safe. They talked about stranger danger, and they felt that because the thing that was in place around stranger danger, that they no longer trusted adults, and they reflected that adults didn't trust kids, and that didn't make kids more safe. So they were saying that when we think about safety, we need to think about not only what things are in place, what strategies we have, but also what the impact that might be on kids' sense of safety. So one of the ways that we sort of talked about this was we developed this worry meter. So the worry meter, as you can see, has the two axes of likelihood and impact. So what we did was we gave kids thousands of post-it notes. Now, just a quick suggestion for those people who do lots of work with kids, particularly research: don't leave the room with thousands of post-it notes to get a quick drink of water or something for another child and then come back in, because ultimately you'll probably find a child covered in post-it notes and everyone's sitting around laughing. But what we did was we got on the post-it notes all the things that they were worried about, all the things that they thought other kids might be worried about, and all the things that they thought adults might be worried about. So we had different colours for each of them. And then we asked them to think, okay, on this matrix, where would we put them? How likely is this risk for kids? And if it happened, how bad would it be? So, for example, there was one young woman who said that she was really worried when she went to the zoo the next week that one of the tigers would escape, that she would be mauled, and worst of all, someone would have it and put it on YouTube. So she suggested that it was very unlikely that this would occur, but that the impact would be huge because A, she'd be dead, and worst of all, people would see it on YouTube. So she put it low, high. So what we did then was we got all these, I think there were about 400 in the end of these post-it notes, and they put them all around on the worry meter. And then we sat with them and talked to them about the Royal Commission and what the Royal Commission was interested in, and we identified those things were in scope and out of scope. So what were some of the safety issues around child sexual abuse, but safety more broadly that the Royal Commission might be interested in, which ones sort of pop up? Now, the ones that came up were abduction. We sort of went in and went, at the end of each session we'd do a bit of a debrief and say, is it really that likely that kids might be abducted? They said, yes. It happens all the time. And in fact, in our schools that we went to, there had been a white van come past recently, so the kids were paranoid about it. Also, the Daniel Morecambe situation was there in place at the time, and they said, absolutely, we're really scared about it because we've seen it on the news. We said, so what are the police or what are your parents or what are schools doing about it? We don't know. No one knows that. They've just told us that it's a risk, so we're freaking out about it because we don't know how adults are responding to it. So they put it up there as abduction. Bullying by adults. We didn't necessarily expect this to come through, but in one of the first focus groups, kids said, actually, let's make sure that we've got bullying by kids, because we get bullied by adults all the time. By our teachers, by our coaches, by the guy down at the pool who bullies us all the time and tells us that we're not supposed to be there or we're not supposed to bomb or what have you, and they use their power over us. It's okay for adults, their power, if it's about protecting us, but if it's to belittle us or to put us down and what have you, that's not okay. Bullying by other children, being pressured into doing bad things they didn't want to do that had negative consequences. Now, I won't go through all of these now because we're a bit pressed for time. Plug again for the website. The report there is there. It's about 100 pages long, but there's some summaries and things too if you're interested about some of these points. Being hurt because adults weren't doing their job or the institution failing to protect them from external threats. So they saw that as a big issue that was likely, and when it happened, it had a huge impact on them and their lives. Was coming across creepy adults. Kids talked about creepy adults in every group that we did. When we asked them what a creepy adult was, they said, that's the thing, it's a kind of feeling, and when we go to another adult, to another teacher or principal or worker or whatever and say, I don't like this person. This is telling me to hurry up. That they don't take it seriously because I can't say this person touched me, or I can't say this person did this thing to me. They just creep me out, make me feel weird, and it's not okay. In one of the schools, some of the young women said that there was an adult that was creepy, that they went to the principal and said, none of us like him and we're not coping with him. The principal said, well, there's nothing we can do. As it turned out, this person was having an inappropriate relationship with some of the kids. And the girls were quite upset about that. They said, why didn't you act on it? We came to you and said, this person creeps us out. And they said that's because adults look for things and need to have acts that they're focused on while we're about feelings. And you need to trust our feelings. If we aren't sure, then you need to talk to us about that. Now, they did recognise that they sometimes mistook a person, place, situation and saw it as being safe or when it was unsafe, or vice versa, being unsafe when it was really safe. But they said that adults need to take their views about that stuff seriously. All right. We then did these response matrices where we ask kids to identify one of those 6 categories, usually. Sometimes they chose other things. And ask them, what would you need if you're in a situation like this? What are adults currently doing well? What aren't they doing well? What gets in the way? And what advice would you give? So kids work their way through those. And from that, we developed some characteristics of a good response to children and young people's safety needs. I'm not going to go through all these because we are running out of time. But they felt that in institutions that were child safe, that adults saw it as their responsibility for helping kids to keep children and young people safe. That there's lots of opportunities for kids to share their problems, that adults in the institution take kids' views seriously and act on them, that adults work with children and young people to find solutions together rather than taking over, as Moore said before, that kids are kept in the loop, that we feed back to them about what we're doing about it. A lot of kids say we raise our concerns, we make a complaint, the adults take it away, and they just think that because an adult's taking control that that's enough for us, or us to feel like adults have taken our views seriously. You need to come back to us and tell us what you did, what you found, because without that, there's no resolution. And kids wanted to see some change. So, what's that say? We've still got 20 minutes to go. Okay. But we've got questions that... Yep. So in regards to what kids want from adults who were trusted, caring adults who would be their champions and who would look after them, they wanted adults who respected their abilities, observations, needs and wishes. They wanted adults to actively ask them about whether or not they feel safe or not. In lots of groups, we had a continuum, and we asked kids, okay, on the line, how strongly do you agree or strongly disagree with a series of statements? And one of them was, adults at my school would only know that I was unsafe if I told them. In almost every group, kids said that they strongly agreed. Now, like I said, in lots of the groups, teachers or support workers or whoever sat in on the groups, and a lot of the teachers afterwards, when they were feeding back, because we had some discussion time in the group about how the session went and what the key messages were, a lot of the teachers said, I'd never thought about that. I always thought, I'm always watching out to make sure that you guys are okay. I'm just checking to see, if I can see things that might suggest that things aren't okay at home or aren't okay out in the community or what have you. But you know what? I've never asked you. I've never said to you, do you feel safe? So maybe I'll start doing that now too. So kids wanted adults to have that conversation. Adults needed to watch other people's behaviours. There was one young person in one of the schools who was saying, I think parents just assume that every teacher in the school is okay. And Morag asked, why is that? And he said, parents school every day, so that suggests that they must trust everybody. He said, sometimes adults might be naive then. Maybe they don't watch out enough to check in to make sure that people are appropriate and responsible and they're dealing with it. They also felt that they needed to have adult allies. So in that case where the creepy adults were there, if we'd found a teacher who believed us and then started to watch that person's behaviour and started asking questions of other students, does this person make you feel uncomfortable or unsafe or what have you, maybe things wouldn't have gone as badly as that they had. Maybe someone could have intervened earlier. Listening to what children and young people are really saying, standing up and speaking out. A lot of the young people were a bit ambivalent about adults in institutions. They said that adults often stick together. So if you go and make a complaint about a teacher at school, then of course the teacher's going to stick up for the other teacher because that's what adults do. And you're a kid and what would you... So, shut up and butt out and get on with it. So kids were saying that they needed some champions, some adult champions who they could go to, who could challenge some of that power and who could support them through that process. Now again, they didn't want adults to just go along with everything. They wanted adults to sit down with them and help them work it through too, because they were very aware that sometimes they mislabelled a behaviour or a person or a place as being unsafe, and that they needed adults to ask questions using their adult heads, using their adult experience to help the kids understand whether or not this is a risk or not. As Morag said, lots of young people said that they wanted adults to do what they said that they would do, and for us to inform them about what happens next. So, why aren't we these champions? What gets in the way of kids being safe and of adults responding in a positive way? Some of the reasons that kids felt that kids were unsafe because of things that the child did or thought that acted as a barrier to them seeking support and for having their concerns dealt with. So some of these was they didn't have anyone to go to. We're not supposed to talk about it too much, but we're in the midst of the residential care study at the moment, and it really upsets me as a former youth worker how many kids we've spoken to said we've got no one in our lives that we can go to if we're unsafe or if something's happening to us. We don't have anyone that we can trust who's accessible to us when we need to. So they could identify their fax worker, or they could identify the ombudsman or whoever, but they said, I don't see them enough and I don't have a good enough relationship with them, so if something happens I need them to be available right now. So one of the kids said, give every kid in care a mobile with speed dial to their caseworker, which I'm sure you're all delighted about as a recommendation, but it's something that they felt was important. Children and young people don't realise how big an issue it is while it's happening. Kids were aware of grooming. They were aware that sometimes adults manipulated them. So that might be a reason why they don't realise that there's a problem and therefore seek support. A lot of kids that they are embarrassed or ashamed about asking for help. They don't have confidence that adults can help. They don't know who to talk to. They think that raising their concerns will make things worse. They're worried about retribution, and they've had bad experiences in the past. We know that from the disclosure literature, that it takes 7 times often for an adult to respond to a young person's disclosure. So every time a kid discloses their safety concern, doesn't respond well, they start thinking, well, is this next adult really going to take my concerns seriously, and is it really worth going through the pain of talking about these issues when I'm not sure that there's actually going to be a positive outcome? But there are also things about us as workers, about us as adults, that we don't spend enough time with kids. You'll see in a minute a quote, I think, from one young woman who said, we're desperate to spend more time with adults, particularly our parents, but people we love and who care about us. We just want to snuggle on the couch. And it's okay if mum's reading her phone, but as long as we're sitting together, we're having some conversations, we want to do that. And we want teachers to be able to sit down with us too and have fun. We want to build a relationship, but unfortunately there's too many pressures. Kids in out-of-home care, but also in the camp program, and one of the other groups said that adults have to spend so much time writing these days that they're always in the office and they're never with us. So it's about thinking, again, this is a strategy that we've got in place to keep kids safe, because we want to have our admin up, but kids were saying that kept them from having that human connection. Adults weren't available or accessible when they needed them, that they have other things they need to do and can't resolve every issue. They don't like coming across children and young people who are uncomfortable, at risk or in pain. A lot of kids talked about that. They said adults don't like having these conversations, not because they're worried about us and our feelings, but they don't know how to deal with kids who are upset. So I'll say something and they'll go, oh, that's terrible, and I'll try to hug them and then try to distract them and talk about something else. And kids said, I can see why they're doing it, because they're a bit worried about me, but they're also worried about them, and they think that if I stop crying or I feel safer, that the problems are going to go away. But they said sometimes it's a quick fix, that later on, 5 minutes later, they're still in the same situation and they haven't had an adult that they can talk to. So it's about saying, how can we change that? How can we help adults have some of these difficult, painful conversations with kids who are distressed, so that kids aren't alone? Often they thought that adults thought that kids thought that adults thought that someone else was dealing with the issue, or that it wasn't their role to respond. Now, it's important to put in the caveat, because sometimes people go, yeah, but what would kids know about this? This study is all about kids' perceptions. Now, it's important for us to have an understanding of their perceptions, because if their perceptions keep them from seeking support, or if if they don't have a lot of confidence in adults because they think that adults think this way, then that's going to change the nature of the relationship they have with that adult and what they do when they're under stress. So adults in these schools may be really aware of things. They may be spending lots of time thinking about safety issues and monitoring those issues. But if kids don't recognise that, if they don't see that, then there's an issue for them and for that safety response.